Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis. This show is a series that has been coming to you from DCTV since 2015 in a weekly program called the Network of Global Corporate Control. Today's program is pre-recorded and is called Climate. Thank you to DCTV and to Carmen Stanley, Project Director, and to Maurice Jackson, Studio Director. Last week, we discussed how people are demanding the world's wealth that is on deposit in the global debt facility. We are discussing how to end the corruption in the world's money and what the next steps are and why we're ready. The next step is for the people who understand what's really going on in the world and I to discuss how we're going to end the corruption in the world's money system. Enough people understand what I'm talking about so that we can take these next steps. We've been fighting this corruption for a long time. I'm going to provide enough background today so that we can start understanding all the corruption and the confusion this has created. We don't even understand the most basic thing about our climate. I give proof for everything I tell you and answer your questions. The proof is in the archives to this series. Don't be confused by my low profile whether I'm representing you and everybody else. We are all in this together. And Alexandra said, "Thanks for all you do, Karen. You're loved more than you know." The latest comments on the DCTV video included climate change, and so we're going to be talking about that today. Hi, Karen. Thank you for posting, and I have read the Bilateral Minefield Breakthrough Successor Agreement. In paragraph 9, it indicates that humanity is no longer required to pay any tax to the global network of corporate control since the sequestration period ended in 2005, which in turn ended the Treaty of 1213. Alexandra has asked us a very good question. We need to understand the corruption in the world's money and how it got this way. This takes us back to the Vatican and to the Magna Carta. I've given you some of the background, and there was a question on the Vatican. You can read that in the teleprompter. I'm not going to go into it in great length. It makes a big question whether we're facing a coming ice age or whether there is a danger from global warming. We are facing an ice age that's going to begin in the next decade. How can we be wrong about something so basic? That's what we're going to deal with today. Some of this post on climate was written by Mike Brakey. The reason many of my posts are so long-winded is because decisions are being taken in a decentralized way, and I'm showing you where the dialogue is. At the end of this tweet, you're going to learn how currency is being exchanged and who owns what. The fact is that nearly all wealth is owned in the global debt facility, and all of humanity has to clean up the corruption and establish decentralized institutions that are accountable. We're going to take things slowly until the corruption is cleaned up. We're going to communicate among each other until we're satisfied that things are proceeding in a decentralized fashion. We are all accountable. And then I signed that as the Overseer Mandate Trustee. Michael Crichton was a great whistleblower. Unfortunately, the national media refused to report his findings to the world at large. This author wrote the following in 2003, and you can see that link in the teleprompter. But what he said, the greatest challenge facing mankind is the challenge of distinguishing reality from fantasy and truth from propaganda. We must daily decide whether the threats we face are real, whether the solutions we are offered will do any good, whether the problems we're told exist are in fact real problems or non-problems. And in 2003, Michael Crichton said, excuse me, could you scroll back for a minute? Right. He said, this comes from a book, Seen to the Left, which was translated from the German, Die kalte Sonne, and it was by Pierre and Doris Gosselin. It can be found at a link which I've given you in the teleprompter. The Neglected Sun, Why the Sun Precludes Climate. And the U.S. college campuses are threatened with the loss of millions of dollars in climate funding if they allow their students and faculty to attend seminars on the theory of climate cycles by true climate professionals. Why are NOAA and the United Nations so fearful about the topic climate cycles? Mike Breakey contacted David Dilley while he was vacationing in Maine a couple of years ago. Breakey's son, Stephen Breakey, also worked with David to enhance his TV workshop and elevate it to YouTube. The presentation, which strikes fear into the hearts and wallets of global warming schemers, is titled, Is Climate Change Dangerous? And there are links to that. If you find time to watch it, you're going to discover why our government doesn't want common sense citizens learning the true facts concerning climate cycles. Believe it or not, whatever humanity does today, the sun is still rising tomorrow. Ignorance is the root and the stem of every evil, according to Plato. Many people have visited sites with the YouTube video, Is Climate Change Dangerous? At the Pierre Gosselin's No Tricks Zone, there have been thousands of visits over the last couple of years. We need more people to visit it. Have you ever read Michael Crichton's 2004 book, State of Fear? It's great summer reading if you haven't read it. There are many footnotes he provided in his novel to prove to his readers that global warming was a sham. When Crichton began researching climate facts for his book, he initially believed in global warming. Crichton had later written how shocked he became upon concluding that this was all a scam promoted by a very powerful group of elites with hidden agendas. Michael Crichton died in November 2008. If he had lived a few years longer, at least until September 19, 2011, he would have learned that there's a group of global mischief makers, that this was confirmed to exist by scientific methods. It was on that date that a comprehensive study by three top mathematicians, Vitaly Glatfelder and Battiston of ETH Zurich, and I've given you the link, announced to the world their startling findings of public market stock manipulations by a group of ancient families. It had been discovered and confirmed that a minimum of 40% of the ownership of 44,000 multinational companies operating around the world could ultimately be unbundled from the layers of legal documents to find a single board of directors secretly overseeing the controls of the global markets. Today, there's a series of 3 excellent articles published by Jeff Nelson, co-founder and managing partner of Bullion Bulls in Canada, on the same entity. They refer to the entity as the One Bank. Anyone can gain access to Jeff's 3 articles on the internet by typing in 3 titles: The Death of Competition, Oligopolies Unmasked, The One Bank, and The Mystery of the One Bank, Its Owners. 10 global banks, which are supposedly too big to fail, are actually a single colossal bank controlled by this international group of elites. The actual owner of the One Bank is the Global Debt Facility, which is a trust that's managed by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. And I vote the shares on the Global Debt Facility. While this previously highly secret illegal organization was officially exposed to the world as the network of global corporate control by Washington, D.C. financial attorney and whistleblower Karen Hudes some 58 months ago. That's actually a little bit longer ago now. This news has yet to be aired by any of our major multinational media outlets. Little is found in print on this revelation by the multinational publishing and print media. Why haven't the multinational media outlets in both the Old World and the New World reported these startling revelations? Their silence is again both deafening and damning. It's for the same reason they don't report the facts of the massive global warming hoax. And then there's some links to that. Between 467 AD and the 1200s, these powerful maritime elites were known as the Venetian Black Nobility. As seen in a chart, any significant global period brings on famine, disease, and death. Forced mass migration of barbarians from the northern climate southward occurs during these cooling periods. This elite group does the opposite. They move northward. The second sacking of Rome occurred from one of these cooling period forced migrations in 467 AD. After the second sacking and fall of Rome, wealthy maritime banking elites escaped to northern marshes of Italy to begin the great city Venice. With their wealth and power, these future Venetians would create another great maritime power in a very short period of time. This Venetian global power structure would then flourish for over a 500-year period throughout the Mediterranean Sea and along the European coasts on the Atlantic Ocean. All is fair in love of power and wealth by the few of privilege. The Venetians rose to global dominance of wealth and power by funding both sides of nations at war. If a great power refused to play the Venetian game, it didn't matter. The Venetians were patient enough to wait centuries, if need be, to eventually take down a rival. Such was the case with Constantinople, who refused to allow Venetians to play evil games of war in their Black Sea. The Venetians used their financing of the Fourth Crusade in 1208 AD as a tactic to both destroy their sea power adversary and sack Constantinople. They had become rivals and enemies 400 years earlier when Constantinople warned they would arrest any Venetian merchant banker found in their territory. Grifters on the move. As was true of the Persia and Greece empires, after foully corrupting and bankrupting a great city, a mighty country, a powerful empire, such as Rome, these grifters typically pack up all their treasure and possessions aboard their merchant fleet and sail to new northern horizons of opportunities during global cool-down periods, when famine, disease, and war arises again and grows worse. Around the 12th century, 800 years after Venice, they migrated north to reestablish themselves in the 43 AD Roman settlement called City of London, which is presently in London, England. The Venetian maritime banking power would then come to be known as the British Crown. They have been there as a great maritime power for over 8 centuries. If democracy and capitalism begin to flourish, send in the Muslims to ignite a new round of religious wars on approaching a cooling period. Some may believe this is about the present time in 2016, as Muslim refugees and terrorists alike stream into all parts of Europe and the Americas. Climatologists are now predicting the next 125-year cooling period begins in another 7 years, 2023. Constantinople, now called Istanbul, Turkey, was in the news recently concerning a rebellion which may have been crushed by the Muslims presently in power. In actuality, the year referred to is 1453. Nicholas of Cusa, and there's a link to that, had in the 1440s inspired the Old World to explore the early roots of democracy throughout Europe. Such a concept blossomed in France, Germany, and England. The people were being put first by their rulers. What an amazing concept. This evil cabal of international maritime bankers feared this would lead to their undoing as royal rulers of the known civilized world. They wouldn't stand for it. They conspired to put the old world on the defensive once more by encouraging and aiding the Muslims' Ottoman Empire to capture Constantinople, later renamed Istanbul, in 1453. With the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire could openly launch full invasions of Europe without fear of rear action by Constantinople. Millions would die during these religious invasions. The reemergence of intense religious wars raging in Europe set aside experiences with democracy. Cusa then realized this experiment would have to take place in the Americas the Vikings had discovered centuries earlier. These evil cabals were too powerful in the Old World to overcome. Mike Brakey learned from Karen Hudis's group these same international bankers are behind the financing of Black Flag attacks in Europe and the U.S. presently, just as they were in centuries past. These cabals want mass invasion by displaced Muslims again around the world. When the next cooling period hits the Northern Hemisphere, all hell will break loose because the international banking elites have been funding a false narrative to maximize the damage of a climate cycle change from warming to cooling. This evil cabal seeks to maximize the damage, destruction, and death of global citizens within the next decade. These cabals have been successfully suppressing and sabotaging all technologies which would minimize the deadly impact of climate cooling. As depraved as this sounds, this secretive cabal of international maritime power elites have secretly dedicated themselves to also suppressing, sabotaging, or destroying through any means available technologies which would minimize the impact of climate change. Mike Brakey has already told followers in the social network the story related to Galt chemical reactors. Great whistleblower authors from the past and present give us additional glimpses at this evil cabal exposed in the 21st century. Okay, now I've finished reading this from the teleprompter. What I'm telling you is that we're facing global cooling, not global warming. And this is done deliberately so that we won't be prepared, so that we're going to have starvation, so that agriculture is not going to recover from this cooling period. And these cycles are intrinsic in the solar in solar power, in the magnetism of the sun. And yes, the scientists are not giving you the correct information. There is no global warming. The NASA is fabricating the information, and this I forget the name of the that young girl from Sweden. She's out of this. She's just totally wrong. And the way that the network of global corporate control can do this is they seize the narrative. The mainstream media just completely fabricates this information. It's not real. It's a bunch of lies. And let's get back to what was going on with the Vatican. The Vatican has not. They've destroyed any evidence of what happened in history, so you don't know what actually happened at all, and you're just following a bunch of lies, which is it's really quite disappointing that that you don't follow critical thinking, and you allow yourselves to be hoodwinked. That's what it is. And this young girl, she's become a media personality, and I'm sure she has good intentions. She doesn't realize that she's being used. But there is no such global warming. That's not happening at all. What we're facing is the inevitable cycles that happen with global cooling, and one of the things that happens with these cycles is there's a volcano which casts a shadow over the sun. That's one of the characteristics of a global cooling period. So, as we've learned, 2023 is when we're going to start facing global cooling, another mini ice age. And I really hope that that we're able to counteract these lies, and that we're able to understand that the Vatican is they're not reliable. The history that they've been telling you, it's not founded on any evidence, because they went and destroyed all the evidence, and the group in Moscow State University has shown how the history that people consider happened never happened. Some of the elites that they say were actually repeating themselves. There's no reliability whatsoever, and you can also tell that this has been totally fabricated if you look at the dates in history. 5,000 years of history. No, it's closer to 10,000 years. So that once you get that wrong, you realize the magnitude of the problem. It's quite apparent. You do need to understand that you've been hoodwinked, and the extent of the deception is just, it's mind-boggling. The universities are all in on it, and so the what you have with tenure systems, that's not to preserve academic freedom at all. It's to preserve academic orthodoxy. So there may be some people who are independent and don't buy all of these lies, but then their academic journals are juried in a way to make it very difficult for them to publish. So you're just you're hamstrung, and the funding that follows. It's if you want to be published, you have to lie. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis. It's my privilege to make sure humanity keeps our wealth. The Venetians rose to global dominance of wealth and power by financing both sides of nations. If a great power refused to play the Venetian game. Excuse me, could you scroll back? Could you scroll back? Yes. The Venetians were patient enough to wait centuries, if need be, to eventually take down a rival. As the truth comes into sharper focus, we have a lot to be thankful for. Peace be with you.